Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Bitcoin in 30 Minutes. I'm your host, Vic, and in this episode, I will be going over and responding to some of the more common criticisms of Bitcoin. These are um, retorts that we hear a lot uh, from other people. We being those in the Bitcoin community who know what Bitcoin is. And it's about 7:30 in the morning, and I'm having my coffee. So if you hear a little coffee sips, that's what's going on there in the background. So the number one issue or number one point that we hear or criticism that we hear in the Bitcoin community is that Bitcoin's a Ponzi scheme. This one is very common, and I want to make it extremely simple. So the answer is no, Bitcoin's not a Ponzi scheme. One of the fundamentals of a Ponzi scheme is there is new investors to pay off the old investors. So, for example, if I'm selling some sort of business or stock that promises some sort of return, right? So, I've already promised to the old investors some sort of return, either in dividends or in terms of appreciation of the stock, or in terms of some sort of other payout. The only way I get that payout is through new investors. There's literally no business activity. There's no, very savvy investment strategy. There's no um, innovation that is producing products, and we're getting very popular. And the innovation and the income coming in is actually what's paying out the older investors. No, the only thing that is paying out these new investors, or excuse me, the older investors, is um, new investors, new capital, new cash coming into the scheme. This is a very, you can kind of look at it as a triangle with three parts. So, new investors, no business activity, promises, paying out to, um, I should say, old investors, no business scheme, or excuse me, no business activity, promises that are paid from the new investors. With Bitcoin, this is something totally different. Um, Bitcoin is a form of open source technology, as stated in episode 102 of this podcast. And Bitcoin um, is a form of technology very similar to like capital or like property. I suppose you could like equate it to a new form of mineral, right? This exotic mineral that uh, is used to fundamentally um, stabilize our monetary system. And that this mineral just so happens to be in the ground, and there's only 21 units of ground available, and um, it's now created, and miners are actively every single day going into the ground and attempting to extract this mineral. Um, the 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 increase of the network, so the more people that participate in this network, the more valuable it is becoming, or it has become, and will continue to become. So as the network increases and more people participate, it seems like a bubble. It seems like a Ponzi, because there's this idea that, okay, more people are gravitating toward this thing, and surely this thing is going to collapse because it has to collapse, right? So that is the criticism, but it's not a Ponzi, um, and as I've just defined it for you, and it's actually not even a bubble, and I'll explain why. Bubbles, if you know anything about finance and you know anything about the way the world works, bubbles are created by big players. Governments create bubbles. Um, they do so through purchasing their own bonds. Um, Banks create bubbles. They do so by financializing the housing market. Um, Let's see what else. Industries can create bubbles. So, for example, like let's say um, there's a single industry that requires a ton of water, right? And that demand signal for a lot of water, like way more water than any other state can provide, would theoretically create a bubble, right? A bubble is this idea of too much demand and too little supply. Um, but the demand is artificial. It's not actually real, and there's no real use case for any of the product. So just because Bitcoin is going through this growth phase from a brand new asset to a kind of like a toddler to a young teenager, that doesn't necessarily mean it's in a bubble. What it does mean is that it's growing significantly every single year, and what we are watching is folks on the sideline, some of whom are on the sideline, are watching this asset grow exponentially every single year, or every other year rather. It goes up and down. Um, the bubble territory, I believe, will come into play where Bitcoin has reached some sort of parity or uh, saturation within the existing financial markets. So when I say that, I mean that Bitcoin will have taken a significant portion of gold. It would have taken a significant portion of real estate. It would have taken a significant portion of fine art, and specifically bonds. Um, so, what happens here in Bitcoin in terms of why it's not a bubble, going back to the second piece as to why criticisms on Bitcoin, is that it's not a bubble because most big players are not in Bitcoin yet. I'm going to go to the third point here. The third point we hear a lot is Bitcoin does not provide income. It's like kind of like what um, Warren Buffett said about Bitcoin. It's like a digital shiny rock, right? Um, like Bitcoin is digital gold, right? But it's a Bitcoin. Gold is a shiny rock, right? And gold also doesn't provide income. And this is one of the if you know anything about Warren Buffett, you know that he also criticized gold heavily because gold didn't provide any income. It didn't produce anything. Productivity is the name of the game when it comes to um, his form of thinking. So there are a couple of ways to respond to this idea that Bitcoin doesn't provide any income. First, it's not true. So I can send some of my Bitcoin to a third party today and get 1.5% APY on that Bitcoin. There are several brokers and third parties that will give me more than a cash savings account on my Bitcoin. I think cash savings account, most of them are like under 1%. Like you get 5 cents in your bank account or something like that per month. It's really pathetic, actually. When it comes to Bitcoin, there are folks who will um, will pay you a little bit of APY to hold your Bitcoin. And I think what they do with it is they use the Bitcoin to create markets, and then they gather fees, and then they, rather than buy their own Bitcoin, they use your Bitcoin to create this market, right? And then they gather fees, and then yeah, so they do what they do with the Bitcoin, and then eventually they give it back to you. I think, and I'll say it again here, and it's a prediction. I think it's going to happen, if probably sooner than later, probably in the next 2 years. We will start to see Bitcoin that is leased out to a third party, whether it be a government or whether it be a company trying to increase the strength of its balance sheet, or whether it be um, a state or a city that needs more collateral to take out a cash loan. We will begin to see Bitcoin leased out to third parties, and that Bitcoin will demand a rental income, like a rent, or some sort of royalty. I think it should be a royalty, but it could very well be characterized as something else like a rent or royalty or some sort of like monthly fee. The reason I think that this will happen is because Bitcoin is digital collateral. And so going back to the some of my prior videos and a lot of the narrative is collateral is property that is used to back a loan. Okay, so collateral could be your car, it could be your house, it could be the family jewels, any form of property that has monetary value in the open market can be used as collateral. Okay, and that collateral can be held by a second, third party, like an escrow, to back the funding of a cash loan, right? And then you pay like an interest rate on the cash loan. So this is the financialization of most assets that have monetary value. Bitcoin is an asset, a collateral, a digital collateral asset that has monetary value. And not only is it being used today and has been being used this way for years and years and years now to back cash loans, I think what it will be used for in the future is not to back a loan, but to back this idea that we need your Bitcoin for our business or for our city or for our state, and we are willing to pay you royalties or a rental agreement to bolster our balance sheet. Um, and I think that will happen in the next 2 years. A little bit as far as my reasoning as to why that will happen, the weakening currency, the catastrophic debt situation, the digitization and the digital economy that's formulating here today, with respect to the the income that folks are making from digital environments like YouTube, TikTok, X, things like that. The lack of productivity in manufacturing. There are some big investments being made in Texas and other states as well as in the United States. But my concern is that it takes time to get those manufacturing and jobs online. And so in the meantime, I think what we'll see is handouts. I think states, cities, and the federal government will begin to either decrease significantly the taxable income of folks, like tax credits and things like that, in order to stimulate the economy, or literally just give people cash. Like literally just send them a cash check every month for like $500 to $1,000 because the economy is so bad. And the only way to maintain the economy and keep it afloat and keep businesses and small businesses and folks, not defaulting on their mortgages and folks, in decreasing welfare lines is to literally give people cash. And so that those handouts require a strong balance sheet. Those handouts require firm, sound financial foundations, and the debt is already catastrophic in a lot of places. And so the only way, or one way, I don't want to say the only way, but one way to strengthen a balance sheet is to put Bitcoin on it, because Bitcoin is global, digital, indestructible, finite collateral. And I've talked about this several times in my previous episodes. But anyway, so that is the response to criticism number 3. Okay, so criticism number 4 is my Bitcoin will get hacked. So Bitcoin is going to get hacked. Either quantum or AI is going to hack into the Bitcoin network and steal all my Bitcoins. So this is a very common concern for folks who don't understand the way Bitcoin works. I think it's really important to note that Bitcoin is constantly under attack every day, 24/7, because if a hacker can steal a Bitcoin, they will try to steal Bitcoin. They will try to hack into wallets by producing a private seed phrase or by producing a private address and attempt to steal Bitcoin. That has never happened in 10 years because technically, mathematically, it's impossible. And I hate to say impossible, but because it's extremely improbable. So the SHA-256 encryption method, as well as the way the Bitcoin network works to confirm valid transactions, and the proof of work, what's called proof of work requirements that are needed to participate in the network and to confirm a transaction, produce not only a disincentive mechanism that bad players won't be going onto the network to expend $10,000 or $50,000 worth of energy only to produce, a not even a good chance of unlocking a private password. But also, and there have been a lot of other commentary about this, about how in order to guess the answer to an address or to uncrack a SHA-256, it's like basically putting a vehicle, a very complex vehicle, together while blindfolded in the middle of space. Like it is the computing power needed to guess where the correct parts go in order to make this vehicle work and actually function as an electric vehicle or a gas vehicle while blindfolded in the middle of space. The statistical probability of that happening is like not even where it needs to be. Like it's infinitesimally small, and so it's more likely for your bank to collapse on a Monday morning, right? So just keep that in mind when you're thinking that the Bitcoin network will be hacked. From a technical point of view, very disincentivized, and then from a math point of view, infinitesimally small. So that's not a credible criticism for Bitcoin, but nevertheless, it's one that we hear often. Okay, the last one, well, maybe the last one, but I have two more left. Okay, so the fifth one is Bitcoin takes too much energy to produce. This one, I think, depends on the value proposition of what you render to Bitcoin. So civilization, cities, communities, we all take energy to produce things. Okay, so I'll just start there, because the value proposition in terms of energy consumption is whether or not something is valuable is directly correlated to whether or not, whether or not something requires too much energy to produce is going to be directly correlated to how much value you put into that thing that is being produced. So when it comes to Bitcoin, I think one very important point to explain is that yes, Bitcoin demands a lot of energy to produce a single coin. All right. In fact, I think it's like $60,000 worth of energy every 10 minutes to produce a single coin at this point. And this is what's called the hash rate, or the amount of computers that are on the network that are trying to guess this math problem correctly in order to be awarded 3.25 Bitcoins every 10 minutes. So that's a lot. It's like in the megawatts, okay? And you'll see a lot of the propaganda going around that says, okay, well, yeah, it takes the power of a small city for every single year, and that's just ridiculous. And what are these Bitcoins anyway? And why do we need to be, these miners should be outlawed and stuff like that. So first of all, China tried to ban miners, didn't work. They also tried to ban Bitcoin, and that didn't work either. So China, being this dictator form of government that is tyrannical in multiple respects, not an open and free society by any means, used their iron fist to try to ban Bitcoin and mining, and it literally didn't work. Like, the mining just went to different countries, it went underground, not literally per se, but in secret. People are going to do what they believe is valuable and in their self-interest, irrespective of what governments think. That's just the nature of human nature. That's played out multiple times in history. So going back to energy consumption and Bitcoin, one of the fundamental pillars of Bitcoin, and I explained this in one of my previous videos, is that Bitcoin has a proof of work mechanism. You have to prove that you have actually expended the compute power to produce the solution to the math problem, the randomized math problem. If you provide no proof of work, you provide no solution. If you provide no solution, you don't have any, you're not going to be rewarded Bitcoin. So that's the mining in its most basic form. A lot of other tokens exist today that don't require proof of work, do not require proof of work. Okay. I'm not going to go over them too much in this episode, but if you want some more my commentary on some of the more popular tokens and their strengths and weaknesses, just put a comment in there, and I'm happy to comment on it. The proof of work is one of the fundamental pillars of why Bitcoin is valuable. It is not an accident. It is not a bug or a bad thing. It is a feature. It is a value proposition as to why Bitcoin is valuable and is what it is. So, in other words, if it only took you the compute power of a laptop at home for like 10 minutes to create 3.25 Bitcoins, nobody would care. It would require no effort, no work. It would not be novel. It would not be precious. It would not be valuable. Nobody would care, right? So keep that in mind when we think about the amount of power, energy, capital investment, jobs, innovation. A lot of these miners are innovating and stabilizing the energy grid. A lot of the miners are actually part and parcel with the chip industry, creating all sorts of innovations that come with the miners, the computers that is, and the power consumption in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So the answer to the question, or answer to the criticism in terms of whether Bitcoin is too energy hungry, it depends. It really depends on what you think is the right answer there. And I think reasonable minds can disagree on whether Bitcoin is too energy hungry. But I will tell you today that we have a currency that requires no power, and that currency is US dollar. It requires no power to produce. Now, I went into previous episodes, I wouldn't say no power, but like nominal power to produce, right? I think the paper is made in factories and things like that, but in comparison, it doesn't require like megawatts of power to produce. And we can see what is happening with homelessness. We can see what's happening with the financialization of everything, including DoorDash orders, from what I understand. Food, right, is being, hey, pay on a loan with a little bit of fee. So anyway, just keep that in mind. I think it is a valid criticism. So this is the one that I will say it is valid. But the question is whether what is too much. And I do think, and I've talked to some Bitcoin miners about this as well, I think that Bitcoin, the miners in certain states will be regulated. In other words, as the Bitcoin industry grows and the mining grows, very similar to like oil and gas, any kind of major industry that places demands on water infrastructure, or places demand on ports, or places demand on common uh, assets like energy, as any industry player would, they need to be licensed. There has to be some sort of mechanism for the state to control how much is too much when it comes to Bitcoin consumption on the power grid. I don't think it's going to be for quote unquote greenhouse gas, and I don't think it's going to be for policy objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions or so-called climate change. I think that narrative is over. It's broken. It didn't work for a lot of folks, and for that's a different conversation and different video. But it will be for stability reasons, and it'll probably be pretty cheap. Like, hey, we just want to know that you're mining, and how much you're mining, and that way we can plan for it in terms of planning for the future and things like that. So I don't think it'll be a way to control miners. I think it'll be a way just to know that they're there. Okay, so let's see, what else? Okay, so the last point here, the last point is Bitcoin isn't backed by anything. This is a really good one. In other words, like when I hold a piece of paper currency, whether it be the US dollar, whether it be a euro, it's backed by the government, right? It is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. It's backed by the full faith and credit of Japan or China or whatever it is. The government is going to see to the fact that I am made whole on this piece of currency. Okay. Okay. So I've talked a little bit about what backs the US dollar in my previous video, but I'm not going to talk about it here. Let's just assume the US dollar is backed by all these things, right? Okay, great. What actually tangibly backs the US dollar? Right? Well, you can say military, you can say oil, you can say real estate, you can say all kinds of things, right? Okay, so now let's go to the Bitcoin world. What actually backs Bitcoin? Okay, so if you go to episode 1 and 2 and some of my previous episodes and listen, you'll know that what backs Bitcoin is an energy compute infrastructure that has basically become industrialized at this point. Bitcoin is backed by energy. It's backed by software. It's backed by agreement of other Bitcoiners and people who hold Bitcoin for its monetary properties. It's backed with a promise that there will never be 21 million Bitcoins that are ever in production, right? And they're being produced every 10 minutes by the miners. So it is backed by a tangible infrastructure. And that's really important to note because this last one is literally just not true. Bitcoin is backed, and it's backed by energy and infrastructure. I think what the real criticism here is that Bitcoin is not backed by money. In other words, it's not like real estate, right? There's not any money that backs it, right? In the open market. Well, that's just not true. I can go to, I don't know, any of the 50 or 100 different brokers that exist today and sell some of my Bitcoin for cash. And I will get that cash into my checking account in like a week. And I think it's really important to note because a lot of folks, they're like, okay, if I buy Bitcoin with cash and I give somebody else my cash and they give me some sort of token or fraction of a token, great. Now what? Right? Can I get my cash back? And the answer is yes. In fact, if you hold that part of the token for at least 4 years, there's a very good chance, obviously nothing is for certain, there's a very good chance that you'll get triple your cash back, right? Because Bitcoin is a stronger, harder form of collateral. It's a harder form of money than cash. And so you buy the Bitcoin, it goes to, the cash goes to the Bitcoin miners and other folks who are part of the Bitcoin space. You get some part of the Bitcoin, right? And then you hold it. And the Bitcoin, price goes up and down and up and down. And the network continues to grow over space and time, right? And space being the world and time being the future. So I'm out here and make it a great day.